There is a Greek myth about a young woman named Pandora. Pandora was given a gift. It was a kind of a sneaky gift. And that particular gift was a large jar, a large urn. Pandora, being young and naive, accepted the gift and took the lid off the jar to see what was inside. And out of this jar arose all of the ailments and the ills of humankind. War, pestilence, famine, suffering, heartbreak, etc., etc. And once she realized what she had done, she immediately put the lid back on, just in time to keep the last thing from escaping. What she managed to keep in the jar was hope. Now, over time, this particular myth had morphed into from a jar to a box, and it became known as Pandora's box. And it has become kind of an icon for opening up something too quickly without being cautious or having sound judgment as to what we might be getting ourselves into. And the other moral of the story, if you will, is that in spite of all of humankind's ills, we still have hope to cling to. And in many sense, hope seems to be the last line of defense of our personal self. There are many stories about concentration camp victims or prisoners of war or castaways that have been kept alive by hope, by focusing on some future gratification, typically reuniting with family or with a loved one. If you saw the movie Castaways, John, who's in it? Tom Hanks, that's who it was, thank you, Tom Hanks. And he was kept alive by his hope of reuniting with his beloved fiancée, which he did, but under very different circumstances. But the whole thing is that hope kept him going. So hope is seen as a very positive quality in our culture. And there are times when it is important, helpful, and perhaps even necessary. But there is a downside, where there can be a downside to hope. There can be a shadow side to hope. And that is when we live habitually in hope. And the downside is that hope keeps us fixated on the future. Because hope is always about something that may happen, that we want to happen in the future. And when we're fixated on the future, we're not living fully in the present moment. The dynamic that gets set up, and this becomes habituated, and it really becomes the core of the ego structure itself. And that is the pattern wherein we find that we're not fully satisfied with the experience in the present moment. So we reach toward the future, hoping for a better one. reaching towards hopefully what may gratify us in the future, because the present moment is not enough, or so we deem it as such. Simple experiment, which we've all done, perhaps didn't know we were doing it as a mindfulness experiment, but a simple experiment is to open up a bag of popcorn or potato chips and take a bite. And what happens? You roll up the bag and put it back? I don't. I don't know many people that do. Because that bite tastes good, but it's not really satisfying, is it? Doesn't really nourish us. So we grab another bite. And another, and another, and another. And this is the whole dynamic behind addiction. This moment's not enough. I need something next, something in the future to fulfill me that's not here now. So we're always nexting, if you will. Instead of being present in the moment, we're nexting into the next moment. Kind of leaning forward, falling forward into the next moment. Not really standing fully present, clearly in this moment. I have another Nasrudin story for you, if you like Nasrudin. If you're not familiar with him, he is a Sufi character. He's a fictional character, but he is what the Sufis would call a wise fool. He looks like a fool, he acts like a fool, but he teaches wisdom. And in this particular story, Nasrudin is sitting with a big bag in front of him. And this bag contains hot peppers. Really, really hot peppers. And Nasrudin is stuffing those hot peppers into his mouth, one after another, eating them like popcorn. And his tongue is starting to swell up, and his lips are swelling up, and his face is wet with tears. And his friend came by and saw what he was doing and said, Nasrudin, why are you doing this? And Nasrudin says, well, I keep hoping for a sweet one. And isn't that what we do? We keep hoping for the sweet one. Maybe the next moment, maybe the next job, maybe the next marriage, maybe the next vacation, maybe the next bite of popcorn. Whatever it is, you say, there's this hoping that I'll get that satisfaction that seems to be missing in this moment right now. And of course, marketers, advertisers, politicians, and so forth know this one real well and use it as a way to entice and perhaps manipulate us. So, the title of the talk is Giving Up Hope. And most folks would say, well, that doesn't sound like a very good idea, because if I give up hope, then I'll live in hopelessness. You know, if you remember the story of Dante's Inferno, when he entered into his version of hell, He saw there was a big sign over the doorway. Abandon hope, all ye who enter here. Implying that hell is hopelessness, despair. That we live in despair, we live in hell. So does hope mean living in hopelessness? Not necessarily, because we can choose to give up hopelessness as well. We can give up hope, and we can give up hopelessness. And when we give up both hope and hopelessness, what do we have left? The present moment, right? When we let go of leaning into, grasping after the future, what we have left is here and now. This experience in this moment. And when we give up hope and hopelessness, we also give up fear. Because fear is also leaning into the present moment, or the future, rather. Actually, it's more leaning away from it. Hope is looking into the future and leaning toward it. Fear is looking at the future and recoiling from it. Both are based on some imaginary future. Both hope and fear keep us victims of our imagination. Keep us victims of the stories that the mind creates. And it can create some interesting stories, can't it? As a friend of mine says, I don't want to go there alone. It's a scary place. There's a story from, old story from India about a great artist, the greatest artist in all the land. And this particular artist painted a mural, a picture, on his wall of his home of a very fierce tiger. Picture was very realistic. In fact, the picture was so realistic, he was afraid to go home. He wouldn't go in his house anymore because there's a scary tiger in there. And that's what we do as well. We create tigers on one wall, and we create rewards on the other wall. And we're constantly bouncing between those two. It might be said that the ego stands on the two legs of hope and fear. That we're constantly juggling hope and fear. And when we do that, we're not really holding the ball. We've always got a ball in the air. We're always driven by hope and fear. And ironically, the things we fear and the things we hope for really were generated in the past. You know, if we have a pleasant experience in the past, we hope we can have it again. If we had a difficult experience in the past, we hope that it'll never happen again, which is called fear. So we think we're looking into the future, and we're really not. We're really projecting the past onto the future. And in both cases, we're living in a fantasy, in something that's not real in the moment. Now, certainly there are times when it can be helpful to look forward or look back consciously and intentionally. But that can be done in a clear and as needed way. What I'm talking about is the hope and the fear that becomes habitual, becomes the way we meet each moment. To give up hope, to give up hopelessness, is also to give up fear. To live without hope is to live without fear. Because we don't hope for what we already have. We don't fear for what we already have. What's here and now, we choose what we want to do with it. We choose how we want to respond. We can't fear the present moment. We can't hope for the present moment. It's already here. And in that place of being in the present moment, we always are living at the point of choice. The only choice we ever have is in this moment, in the present moment. And when we live in the present moment, beyond hope and fear, we're living always at the crossroads of choice. And that's very empowering, because the greatest powers we have as human beings, number one is our awareness, and number two is the power to choose. So where am I putting my attention? And what am I choosing to do? So am I making my choices from the reality of the present moment? Or am I making my choices out of hope and fear generated from the past and an imagined future? When I live in the present moment, I'm always creating my life. Because my life in the future depends upon the choices I'm making in this moment. And if I'm making choices in this moment based upon the reality of this moment, then I have the ability to choose from many, many, many different options. If I'm making choices based on the past or the imagined future, I really don't have any choice. I'm just perpetuating the past. I'm doing the same thing over, hoping for a different result. And I do the same thing over, hoping for a different result when I live in hope and fear. But when I let go of hope and fear, and I'm willing to be brave enough, if you will, to fully land in this moment, whatever this moment has, then I have the ability to choose. Then and only then do I have the power of choice. And the power of choice is very, very creative and very powerful. So we have an option in every moment as to what we choose to be aware of, how we choose to respond to what we're aware of, and what we choose to do based upon what we're aware of. And when that awareness is anchored in this moment, then the choices are infinite, and the possibility is virtually infinite as well. So thank you for listening, and thank you for sharing your practice with us this morning.